So I want to continue my discussion on community involvement. That's really important for encouraging sustainability within the organization, fostering partnerships, so that I can create these partnerships with different people in our community. It's really beneficial to our organization. We also want to make sure that we're getting feedback on our organization. Are we meeting the community's needs? How do we know? Well, we need to create these partnerships to get their feedback. Let me back up a little bit. So before I mentioned that we only provided services for women and children. So after getting feedback from community, we realized maybe we should provide services for men as well. I mean, we had Dawn, Deaf Abused Women's Network. What about men? So, I mean, that kind of feedback has enabled us to make change within our organization. A lot of organizations will have the letter W in them from that kind of women's empowerment era. So that W really impacts the way that the community sees our organization. Who are we providing services for? So now part of my 5-year strategic plan is to get rid of that W and make it known that we do provide services for all victims of domestic violence, not just women and children. So when we talk about community feedback, there's 3 things that I want to mention. How our needs, if their needs are being met, about our quality of services, and our image within the community. So I've talked about nonprofit organizations, how do the board of directors work, the community, fundraising. Now I'm going to get a little bit more specific and talk about Dawn, the organization that I work for. So I'm going to talk about the history, or we call it the her story, of Dawn. Programs and services, our role in the community, what does that look like now, and how to contact Dawn. So history of Dawn. A few minutes ago I was talking about ADWAS over in Seattle, Washington. That organization, that was the first organization set up for victims of domestic violence. It was set up by a woman named Marilyn Smith. What happened was there in Seattle, there was a deaf woman that was killed as a result of domestic violence. And there was no one there to advocate for her. So, I mean, the community was in an uproar, and they decided it was time to set up an organization to serve that community. I mean, they were started out in the basement of her home. Their budget was $4,000. I mean, it has really exploded since then. Now there's 18 staff. There's a huge budget. It's really a great model for the rest of us on how to base our organizations. I mean, really, we think of that organization as a trailblazer for the rest of us. And recently, in 1999, they were awarded a huge grant so they could set up different chapters of their organization throughout the country. They also provide trainings. People are able to go there from different organizations and learn and go back to their own states and implement what they've learned. So Dawn started providing services in 2003. So some organizations that were there for that training that I mentioned are still functioning today from all over the U.S. So there's Deaf Hope, that's in California. There's an organization in Vermont, DVAS. Abused Deaf Women of New York, that's in New York, obviously. There's one in Colorado. So they're just starting to pop up in Arizona, these 501c3 organizations. Pennsylvania, Kentucky. I mean, some of these new organizations are struggling with money because the economy has made an impact on their businesses, but they're still popping up all over the place. I want to talk about Dawn's vision. When we set this organization up, what were our goals? So really our goal is to have a diverse community. We want our members to be able to interact without fear and free of violence.
And also access of information and justice without feeling judged or looked upon by their own cultural values.
We want to look at an individual's pursuit of their own happiness, which can mean different things for different people, but it's important that they are able to pursue that. So now I'm going to get a little bit more specific about public good and our mission statement. So this is a deaf community-based nonprofit organization. We want to educate the community about domestic violence and sexual violence and stalking. As within the deaf community, we share a common language, which is ASL. And really our main goal is to end the cycle of domestic violence, sexual violence, and stalking. My real goal, I mean, this is not related to the organization, but my goal is to be put out of a job. I want the cycles to end. So I would love to retire and be able to sleep at night. So that's my goal. I'm going to talk a little bit about our services, what we offer here. Not the program, but the services that we offer. So linguistically and culturally appropriate, we service deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind survivors and families here in the DC area, the DC metropolitan area, as I mentioned before. An empowerment philosophy, so it means that we're all equals here. The staff, the volunteers, the clients, we're here to support them, but we are not above them. We're here to lead and support. Our services are survivor-centered. I mean, without them, we would not be here, and we need to always remember that. We really depend on peer advocacy as well. I mean, a lot of domestic violence organizations use peer advocacy, but they forget about the culture. So here, I mean, it's more about the deaf culture. We need to be a model for that and really depend on peer advocacy. It's also important that we have an understanding of deafness and deaf-based violence. How is that different than other organizations out there? It's also a requirement to be fluent in American Sign Language so that we can effectively communicate with the community.
I was curious, this may be a little off point, but I know that survivors and victims can come to Dawn, but I'm curious about their family members. Do you have services provided for family members if they feel that they need support going through the traumatic experience that maybe their loved one went through?
You mean from a Dawn perspective, Dawn services?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Sometimes we don't even see their survivor. Maybe they're not ready for services. Maybe it's not safe for them to come because they're being stalked or something. So yes, we can provide services maybe through their roommate, through a family member. Let's say, oh, my daughter experienced this or my best friend experienced this, so we'll support that person who will in turn support the victim. Statistically, it takes about 7 times of being abused for someone to actually leave that situation. So maybe it's my best friend or my daughter is in a violent relationship and they are together and I'm concerned about it. Maybe they leave to get advocacy and they go back, and I mean it can be off and on. So statistically it takes about 7 times for them to leave the relationship. So with that kind of back and forth, maybe as a parent or a best friend, I would start to lose my confidence that they will leave. So it's really important for us as an organization to be a continued advocate, to let them know, don't lose hope, to keep supporting their roommate or daughter. Maybe they have children and they feel like they can't leave, and maybe if they left the relationship, something would happen to the kids. So there's a lot of things to consider in these types of relationships. So yes, we absolutely support the family. As I mentioned, the 7th time that we'd be ready to leave, maybe my family would not believe me and they wouldn't be there to support me. So I feel like I'm isolated, I'm alone. Who do I trust? Where do I go? So yes, we definitely support the family to keep positive and to provide their support to the victims. We don't have any judgment in our services. So here are some 3 guidelines that we use for our program. Preventative education, the first one. Reaching out to populations that are at risk. So already, just being within the deaf community, you're considered an at-risk population. The statistics for domestic violence are higher than your average population. But we do, within the deaf community, have specific target populations. Maybe people that have recently immigrated or students, so we do have specifics within the deaf community. Also, it's important to educate the community about deaf-based domestic violence and sexual violence. The second guideline is crisis intervention. That means we provide peer, legal, medical, and system advocacy. Maybe that means going to court with someone if they're going through a divorce or a custody battle. Maybe when they're getting a restraining order and they need our support, we can be there for that. Medical advocacy. If they're going through a hospital stay and they're by themselves and they need support there, we can be there for that as well. System advocacy means maybe a survivor, they have goals for themselves. They want to secure a home for themselves and their children, a lawyer, but they don't have the resources to do so. So we can provide services for that as well by finding resources for them and providing resources for them. So they don't have to worry about these kind of things like fighting the system. They can focus on healthy living. Also within the crisis intervention, we talk about survivor support services. So really that's whatever they need, and we do our best to find resources that fit their needs. Third is our network advocate program. So like I mentioned, we have an online program that's running now. We also have well-trained staff and volunteers. And if you contact them, they will respond right away. It's a hotline, it's open 24/7. So maybe if you feel like you might need information, you can contact us anytime and someone will always respond to you as soon as possible. So how are we funded as a nonprofit organization? So we're funded by grants, in-kind services, that can be interpreters, therapists,